Hello and welcome to this latest installment of the NIMSY Live event series. I am your host today, Tucker Johnson, and today we are talking about the latest research from NIMSY Insights, which is going to be our annual consumer software vertical report. If you are not already doing so, make sure that you are following NIMSY Insights, subscribe to NIMSY Insights. We're coming to you live on LinkedIn, YouTube, X, Facebook. So whatever's your platform of choice, make sure you are following us there. Why? Because then you can be one of the first people to find out when we publish new research, which, like the Consumer Software Vertical Report, which we are going over today. So make sure that you are subscribed to us, of course, over on our YouTube channel. That's where all of our old episodes of NIMSY Live and the NIMSY Live event series, they're all archived over there, so you can go back and play catch up if you haven't had a chance to take a look at those yet. Today, we are going to be talking about the Consumer Software Vertical Report, and this is a report that explores how localization, AI, and accessibility shape global success for consumer-facing software, from fintech to edtech to wellness and entertainment apps. It analyzes how leading companies design localization as part of the product experience, highlights emerging trends like same-day localization and AI-driven workflows, and provides real-world case studies showing how language strategy drives user growth, retention, and trust worldwide. Today, my guests joining me are, of course, authors of the report, Beata and Arina from the NIMSY Insights team. Beata and Arina, welcome to the show. And also, just get through the intros here. Also, we have Emma Wallerstein from Bitvavo, one of the leading fintech companies featured in the report. Emma brings a real-world perspective on how localization operates inside fast-moving, highly regulated software environments. Emma, Arina, Beata, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Super nice to be here.
Yeah, and especially to my NIMSY colleagues here. I'm going to start with you as we get into this. Thank you so much for putting this report together. The Consumer Software Vertical Report is available at nimsy.com. I'll put a link into the comment section over on LinkedIn shortly once we get into this here. But Arina, let's start with you. Who's this report for? What's this report about? Just kind of lay the foundation for us so that we can go through this today.
Sure. Thanks so much, Tucker. And thank you so much, ladies, for joining us today. This report is for anyone in the software localization industry or other localization industry in general, because it would be useful for anyone who works in the industry. Even language service providers, I would argue. Because they can learn from it firsthand from people like Emma, who is a language service buyer, what her localization program looks like, what are her challenges, and how you can support them. So I think it would be beneficial for anyone. But of course, we had a pleasure of interviewing people like Emma, who are on the front lines of localization and coming up with amazing solutions every day. I would say one of the highlights for me was to learn at a software company, does localization get enough engineering support? You should find the answer in the report. We're not going to spoil it for you.
The answer is no. The answer is always no. We need more engineering support. Sorry, I spoiled it for you.
You did.
But the answer, but the more interesting question is why and how do we get that engineering support? Right.
That's true. That's true. I would say, of course, localization needs advocacy and needs to be heard more carefully. So hopefully this report raises this issue more broadly for localization leaders and for software engineers who hopefully decide to take more interest in localization.
Well, thank you for the introduction to the report. We're all on the same page now. I want to dive in because we don't have, this is a chunky report. And when I realized, all right, we're going to be doing a podcast live stream about this report, the first thing I said was, there's no way I'm going to be able to go in depth into everything that's covered into this report in 45 minutes or an hour, which is okay because you can go over to nimsy.com and check it out for yourselves. But what I do want to do is kind of go through some of the key takeaways. Like I went through here, and Emma, you went through here and gave me some of your key takeaways. and just kind of make sure that those are highlighted. So maybe we'll turn it over to Emma now. Talk to me about this concept. Localization isn't optional. I don't think that's a controversial statement, particularly with the NIMSY Live audience here. But in Europe, and especially in business to consumer type companies, customers just move on if you're not providing localization. Talk to me about that concept a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you think about downloading apps, that's sort of what we're focused on at Bitfavo. We have an app for trading, and I think I'm downloading an app, I'm checking it out, and if I hate it, I'm just going to delete it, and I'm going to go back into the store and I'm going to find something else. And if I, especially in our industry at Bitfavo, we work in fintech, we work in crypto. This feels a bit. It could feel a bit overwhelming or a bit confusing. It's maybe more technical than every single person who downloads the app is ready for. So if they also can't understand the language that they're exposed to, they're not going to stick around. And I think in addition with finance, you don't see people who download an app, try it, say, oh no, I'll come back in a year and see if it's any better. They found something else. They found their solution by then. So I think that localization is just not an option anymore. Especially when I think about Europe, our customer base is Europeans, and there's a lot, especially we're in the Netherlands, there's a lot of people that speak really, really good English, but they're not that's not the language that they feel comfortable in, and it's especially not the language that they feel comfortable doing finance in. So I think that for me, when I look at fintech and BTC and Europe in general, it's not a choice to do localization. I think you really have to make that good first impression. You have to get people engaged with the product that you're selling, because otherwise they're gonna leave. It's not like a backpack where you have 6. You get one app per purpose.
Well, and you bring up a good point too, which I always like to point out because it's very relevant to global expansion, is you never get a second chance to make a good first impression. And if you try a market entry and you're not making good first impression, either your app's broken or more likely the localization was just not done well, it's not speaking to that local user base, then they're going to move on. And they might come back and check you out. People say, "Oh, have you tried this app?" No, I haven't. I tried it 2 years ago. I still hate it because, right? So it is super important. It also kind of brings us to the next question here, which is, okay, localization isn't optional, but we have all of this new technology that's making localization, I mean, for lack of a better term, I know it's more nuanced than this, but it's making localization easier. It's making localization cheaper, faster, all of these things. So the excuse for not localizing something is kind of going away with all of the new technologies and solutions that are out there. And this is largely driven by this idea of good enough quality, right? Where I feel that's one of the major trends that we've seen with advancement in technology is this idea, well, we can do more with this technology and it just has to be good enough. There's not this obsession for quality. Maybe turn it over to my NIMSY team. What were some of your findings as you're going through this and talking to different folks in the vertical about this idea of quality being good enough?
That's a great question, Tucker, and I think it brings us back to content tiering, right? This is essentially about content tiering. In order to make localization not just a cost center, and in order to be able to prove the ROI, you need to kind of have an explanation of which content is more important than the other, which at the end of the day, it ends up being tiered. So I think Emma and Beata can confirm that in the real world, unfortunately, we cannot aim for a perfect localization of every and each content piece or content type. Let's say marketing content tends to be tier 1, the most important and the first touch of the client, whereas some descriptions, I remember Emma saying some FAQ sections tend to be translated with less resources, let's say automated, right? Automated translation. I'll hand it over to Emma and Beata.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, is that yes, we can do more now, and we can use AI to really help us speed things up, but so can all of our competitors. So we have to think more critically now about what is the content that's going to make the difference for the user. And I think that's where we want to put our efforts, which is really nice, because before we kind of were like, oh my gosh, anything that's red, we have to put a human on it, right? We didn't have this option, but now we can say, okay, this is the content that's really important to us, and this is what's going to make the user journey feel real. And that's where we can focus our efforts. And that's also where you have to focus our efforts, because everybody has access to these AI tools. We're not the only company that has discovered AI, unfortunately. So I think Turing is such a nice way to allow you to use AI strategically and helpfully without sacrificing the human element of your content, right? And it allows you to use the humans in a way that's actually more strategic than before.
Well, Beata. Yeah.
Right, let me add just one more thing. So there's also like this thing about different markets. So obviously we have some markets that are more important and the other ones that are, let's say, bringing less revenue. So we can also hire our content accordingly to the ROI and to the importance, not only of the content, but also of the markets. So for example, we can bring more of our human resources to the right market that we feel that most of our consumers are in, but we should never forget about these other ones, because even though they're just growing right now, we want to, well, the companies should want to also, develop their localization into those regions. So we also have this section right there. I know that's lengthy, but it's worth reading about, different regions that are growing in different markets. So for example, fintech is really a good match for South America, for example, where we see a lot of growth, but also APAC and of course, Africa and the Middle East.
Well, and looking at the numbers in the report, growth is happening everywhere. This isn't a situation where the South American market's down, but Europe's up, or Africa's growing like crazy and North America's stagnant. We see a lot of growth everywhere across the board. It's just the growth rate that it is a little bit different across the different markets, right? So looking at this, based upon the research that you guys put together, where are companies investing not only for today but for tomorrow? Which markets? Which areas?
Mm-hmm. So of course we see that North America and Europe are like the go-to, and then they meet these markets that everyone thinks of, and that's understandable. They're very well developed. The consumer base is wide and it has good purchasing power. So that's understandable that companies want to go after those. But we also see a lot of, especially educational companies and fintech companies going after South America, especially now with the let's say emergence of AI, changing the landscape a bit. And of course, Asia is growing. So China, Japan, Indonesia, those are huge markets with a huge population base as well. So it's worth looking at those as well.
Yeah, but in reality, of course, and this would go to Emma, some regulated kind of verticals inside the vertical, like neobanks are, and trading is a highly regulated industry. So it's very important to be, number one, compliant, and number two, make sure that the market is allowing your kind of business to happen.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this today, looking at the report and just thinking, I know that the US is such a big market and everyone's really always excited to break into the US, but I see also in Europe, particularly in the last few years, that there are trends both from a consumer side, but also from a regulatory side and sort of a just general governmental side to move more things to Europe. And so if you, there's demand to have more European players, like native European players in the software industry, whatever kind of things you do, but particularly things around data security, that kind of stuff. Like there's opportunities right now for European companies to make a lot of strides in those areas that bigger sort of American companies that could kind of splash lots of money at problems used to fill those niches. But I think now there's room for European companies to come in and think like, oh, this is a way to win the European market a little bit back from those big American giants that were playing for a while.
Yeah.
That's true. And if we add a little bit to compliance, many European companies are unable to, let's say, store their data or process it through any US-based servers. So it's really, Emma, kudos for saying that this is a good time because of the new European laws to make a move.
But I think at that point, it's like if you're going with a European company, you're also going to say, hey, I would like this to be in my language. I want this to be accessible to all my employees that work at my company who, they use English. A lot of big companies in at least in my experience in Europe use English in the workplace, but it's not necessarily what everyone feels most comfortable working with. And smaller companies for sure probably don't work all in English and would like to have the user experience be more accessible to them in the language that they speak.
Yeah, and it's funny that you also, I mean, it's not funny, but it's interesting that you also mentioned accessibility, because that's another big point of the European market. So we had this European Accessibility Act going into force in June, and we expect more and more laws following, and we have a lot of compliance regulations regarding that. So I think that it's also important to keep that in mind, that it's not only about, the language being accessible, but more about the usability of the app. So when we create software, we should think with accessibility first, and then, also include that into the localization processes.
Absolutely. I think there's some regulators in my industry that say, you have to offer the information in the language that your users speak, right? You can't just say, oh, English is good enough because they speak really good English in that country. I think that's part of the accessibility, even on a regulatory level. But then, of course, I see also because of the EAA rather, that accessibility is becoming a much bigger topic at every company that probably in the past wasn't really thinking about it. And it's so interesting to me. It's obviously like a very natural ally to localization, but we haven't talked about it. We really haven't discussed it before, but now this year, really, I see a lot more coming in. I was taking a survey about localization and accessibility, and have you thought about it? And what does localization team do to work on accessibility? So it's surprising to me that we didn't really think about it before, but now that it starts to come up at all these localization events and in the discussions that we're having, I'm like, yeah, of course, it makes so much sense that we would partner together, because this is how we think about people using our products. Can they use it in a way that feels natural for them in whatever different kind of way they need to use it?
Yeah.
Well, I think we have seen the overlap between accessibility and localization practices, just not necessarily in this vertical, not in but like on the government side, highly regulated side. I see a lot of projects where they use the terms language access versus translation interchangeably. So it's nice to see that that's coming in, because it provides another use case or another case another bullet point for our business case on why localization is important, for the accessibility reasons, which are regulated. But you also mentioned, Emma, like the end user experience is what really matters here. And we talked about quality, this idea of being good enough translations, tiering our different markets and languages and content types so that we can make sure that we're giving just the right amount of quality and not overspending in one area. But this kind of brings us to a conversation about how do we measure, and what specifically is interesting to measure when we're talking about the software vertical versus other types of localization projects. What are the areas that if where can we move the needle from a localization standpoint in software?
Yeah, I think that's also something that I've been thinking about a lot lately when I think about good enough, because I've been in discussions with localization, at events and different people, and about this sort of like, sort of valley of quality, right? You're like, you can only get your quality so amazingly until you're no longer really, especially when you're thinking about a UI interface. There's definitely like, is it working? Can I use it? But at that point, there's no more optimization to be done. And I think for so long in localization, we've talked about like translation quality needs to be like this, and how can we make translation quality better, And I think what I want to start doing is saying, like, can people understand how to use this? That's my goal. Then I think we must step back and step away from translation quality and start looking at the user journey, because I think that's somewhere that we haven't always been able to influence, right? Translation is really nice and right within my sphere of influence. I can make the translation quality better.
It's
I can,
comfortable.
yeah, I can directly
It's our
influence
comfort
that.
zone. Yes.
Exactly.
Mhm.
I don't have to ask any other stakeholders to help me make the translation quality better. But when I start to look at the user journey and I see that, well, you know, this makes a lot of sense in the Netherlands, and it's really easy, and it's totally how, you know, people in the Netherlands are expecting to interact with this product. But then we go and do user testing in Germany, and they're like, I don't know what this means. There's not enough text here. I'm a little nervous. I'm not sure if I want to click on this button. Those things are harder for me to change, right? I can't redesign the app by myself. I don't have designers on my localization team. So I think that's really something that I've been trying to think about, like measuring the translation quality is one thing, and I think you do it and you get it till it's good enough, and then you don't spend more time on it. Then you start looking at the actual user flows. How are all the different languages doing in the onboarding? How are they doing in the buy, you know, flow? Can they stake their crypto, and then, you know, earn the rewards that they're expecting? Those kinds of flows about how do I think, you know, as a German speaker or a Spanish speaker, how do I think I should progress through this experience? That's something that I'm more interested in measuring now. So looking at the conversion rates there. And then when I see discrepancies, saying, okay, there's maybe where we need to do some user testing, or we need to try some A/B tests to kind of understand what it is that's missing. Because oftentimes I was seeing the text was good. Every native speaker at the company was like, there's nothing wrong with this text. And then it was just driving me insane. Why are French users not doing as well as Dutch users when the text is good and all the French speakers say it's good and they're very particular, so I trust them. And that's when I started thinking, like, it's maybe there's a good enough translation quality, and then you have to move to something else.
Once you start hitting those diminishing returns, as you
Exactly.
mentioned, it's like it gets to a point where it's like, and we've all worked on a project like this, where usually a
Yeah.
client request or boss request or stakeholder request is 5 different rounds of QA. And by the time you get to the 4th round, the 4th reviewer is correcting stuff back, making
Yeah.
changes from the 2nd reviewer. So yes, there's definitely some diminishing returns when it comes
Yeah.
to looking at that.
That's also at Bitfavo, I started doing basically like a translation audit, because I there's a lot of we're a very European sort of global company. There's a lot of different people on the team, and a lot of different people that speak the languages that we localize into, and everyone has a different opinion on how the localization quality of different parts of the app are. So it got to the point where I said, I can't I can't keep changing this Dutch word to this and then changing it back because someone else didn't like that, and then changing it to a third option. So I just started doing these sort of audits where I get random people who've never used Bitfavo before to just go through and read all the text. And I ask them, how's the text? Does it sound normal? Was there any weird phrasing? Just straight ask them. And then I made like little scores, and I said, okay, once we reach
And you don't
acceptable
ask,
to
just
excellent.
really quickly, you don't ask, how's the translation?
No.
Right? Because that's not what you want to measure.
I say, is there anything, did it seem weird to you? Was there anything that was difficult to do? And we get to the excellent score, and we're happy. And then when someone says, this one word is weird, I would never say this one word in Dutch. I say, look at this score, here you go. We're not focusing on that word anymore. I mean, I love the feedback, but especially I think at least at my company, so global. There's every opinion under the sun exists here, and I can't unfortunately optimize for each individual person. I have to find what works the best, and then say, now I need to focus on where localization can make an impact to users actually using Bitfavo.
And this brings up the point around where do we draw that line? Where do we say, all right, we're moving on with this? another way of thinking about that is, where do we draw the line between human tasks and automation? Because the report goes into this in depth, and I'm not going to try to summarize it. So I'm not qualified for that. But the report goes into this, thinking about automation, thinking about AI, thinking about machine translation, i.e., generative AI, using generative AI now to do translations. How do we see the technology, and I'm going to turn this over to Arina, how do we see advancements in technology in the last couple of years affecting the consumer software vertical that perhaps haven't gotten to other verticals yet? Because I feel like the software vertical is kind of on the cutting edge, because their core competency is writing code to make things more efficient. So you would think that it serves as kind of a bellwether for the rest of the industry where we're going.
Yeah, that's so right, Tucker. But coming back to the point that we made in the first minutes, is that unfortunately the software vertical gets all of the challenges of a cutting edge vertical, like
That's fair. Yeah.
huge amounts of source text, high complexity of processes, because it's usually not only the website that needs localization, like in Emma's case, it's also an app, it's also a highly regulated vertical. So you get all of the challenges, but you don't necessarily get a lot of support from engineering, and you'll usually from
I'm sensing a theme here, a
yes.
recurring theme in this conversation.
Yes, so you usually are the last in line for any engineering resources, and rarely do you get any engineering support just dedicated to localization and no one else. But technology-wise, it's good to see that some companies do get their proprietary tools from engineering that definitely help. Yeah, I would pass the word on to Beata and Emma to add on that.
Right. So that's what you mentioned is really important, but I'm also trying to think how we can link it to another part of the report, which is that even though AI is cutting edge technology, it still needs human review, human supervision. And I think that the biggest problem of the software industry is that now, anyone can, maybe not anyone, but almost anyone can code, and those things happen really fast. But there's like so many little details that you have to take into consideration when you actually localize your strings, your entire software. That it's not just that you can leave it up to AI and it's going to be done perfectly and you don't have to do anything, but it really needs a lot of effort. It really needs a lot of knowledge, know-how, and I think that that's the biggest part that most people are missing on. They just think that they can throw it into AI because it speaks different languages, and that's going to be done. And that's not exactly how it works. And I think that Emma, you can tell us a lot of stories about that, so I'll pass it on to you. But that's just like that's not how it works.
No, I think that the first thing that you realize after you start using AI, right? Because it has been kind of sold to us as like, this is magic and you can just get it done and it's amazing and it'll fix all your problems. So as long as you don't go into it with that attitude and you think, let me check, you will see very quickly that there's some stuff that it's just not going to be very helpful with. And I mean, it's the things that are mentioned in the report as well, right? Open. A human can't translate that correctly without context. So why do you think that the AI can do that? There's no one in the world that knows if open is an adjective or a verb just by me telling you the word. So I think that there's a lot of things like that you immediately think, you immediately realize I'm not gonna use AI on this content, or I'm gonna use it, but I'm gonna have a heavy review process. But I think, especially at least on my end, I'm not that interested in using AI for our UI interface, because that kind of content is so context heavy, and I would spend more time giving the AI all the context that the human could probably just see from the screenshot and figure out, and my little brief, that it really doesn't save any time at all. And in the end, it's probably not as good. So I think that the first thing that you really spend your time doing is deciding which content you want to use AI with, and what guardrails you want to put in place there. Because the guardrails take up more time So then that lowers the value of using the AI, but maybe it's still depending on the amount of work that you're doing, right? The content volumes, perhaps it's still worthwhile. So we do use AI with some, well, most we use it with content that's being written to be read by other robots. So it's like, okay, if we have something that's SEO, maybe we will translate that with AI, because we have huge volumes of SEO content, but then we're going to get that optimized by a human, because obviously there's some SEO rules that we want to apply, and we want it to actually make sense as well. Of course, that was something that was also mentioned in the report about the hallucinating. It definitely does that. And I think also, as many rules as you give it, it's still, I remember having a fight with ChatGPT about the word account in German, because the word, like the traditional German translation for account, is really a particular word that kind of means like a bank account, and that's not the account that you get at Bitfavo. So we use just the word account. And ChatGPT was convinced that even though I gave it the glossary, that it should be using the German translation for account, konto. And I was like, and I said to it, I said, is that the translation that's in the glossary? And it's like, oh, you're right, it's not. And I was like, but
JK.
JK, yeah,
Right.
exactly. So I think that there's you the first thing really is that you try to figure out, and you figure out pretty quickly which content is worth spending time, like spending the effort to do AI with, which AI content is actually going to help you save time, and then you kind of move on from there. But that's a big hurdle, and if you just pop everything in, no, you're gonna have some big surprises in a few weeks when people start reading it.
So you have to figure out which content you're going to use AI on. But really, that's just scratching the surface. And we go into this in the report here. So, Beata, Arina, maybe I can turn it over to you for more. But translation and content is just one of the areas, really, that we can look at AI. I'll pull up the report here. We can use it for personalization, content generation, quality assurance, automation. All of these different areas are areas where we can apply AI. And frankly, my personal experience, looking at the most impressive case study that I've seen, it's one of NIMSY's case studies, of course, is not using AI necessarily for translation, but during the testing phase and the amount of efficiencies that can be gained there. So where else can we expect AI to be changing the way that we work in software localization beyond just machine translation and content?
Well, obviously, personalization is going to be a huge trend for the following years. We saw that also in the previous chat of ours in the retail software report, that there's a huge, there's a huge need for personalization in almost every type of services. And we can achieve that, of course, through AI and its data analysis. So I think that almost every industry is trying that right now. The most obvious example is, of course, it's outside of the software vertical industry, but it's how Netflix personalizes the offer. So think into those terms, and that can be applied, in the fintech, in any other industry as well. Maybe on a different scale, but the principle remains. So that would be one of the things that I think that AI is going to be actually leading the change. Then we have, of course, quality assurance. So I think that Emma touched upon that a bit. So it's not a perfect solution, but we can expect it to be able to, for example, flag some issues, and then humans can actually take their turn to repair the content or improve it somehow. So that's another thing. And if you could just, I'm thinking, because I'm not sure if I remember that by heart, but if you just scroll a bit up, then I will see the last example that I wanted to use.
Oh, yes. So we talk about hyper-personalization, challenges and consideration AI and localization. I think you really hit something on the head here with hyper-personalization, because it's more scope creeping into what we could potentially do. And it's an opportunity that we need to grab on for localization departments around the world. But also there's process optimization, which is
you.
I mean, big surprise there, but it's not something that we've been talking about in our industry. We've been talking mostly about AI and language and AI and content, but I mean, nerds have been using AI for process optimization since before it was cool. So it's a big area for improvement here. I'm sorry to cut you
Yeah.
off, Beata.
No, it's perfect. So Emma, could you go into that?
Yeah, I was gonna say I've been very surprised that, and maybe I'm just not knowing about what's going on, but I really thought like AI was gonna help me no longer have to manually select linguists for every job that I put together. It was gonna like pull my brief from my ClickUp ticket and pull the tag from the TMS and assign the right linguist and set the due dates, but it's not done any of that for me yet. And that to me is like, please, what I would love for more TMSs to get involved in that kind of automation. I
They're
don't
out
really
there,
want to
right? They're out
Yeah.
there. It's just everyone's kind of figuring stuff out right now,
Yeah.
right? But there are some, and this is a question for our colleague who's not here, Yulia Kulkova, and the reporting that she puts together on language technology is there are so many solutions, and it's an exciting time because people are just really experimenting, and we're getting out of the phase of wishful thinking and product development roadmaps and promises and PowerPoint decks, and getting into that phase of like real life case studies and actual savings happening, whether those savings be in money, time, human effort, whatever.
I think that's the thing. I've seen like I'm a one person localization team, so I go to like basically any event that anyone invites me to go to, so I can speak with other localization
It's
professionals.
one of the best ways.
Yeah, and there's like a very dramatic, clear shift in the topics starting this year, which was it was all AI for about 2 years, and now this year I've been to 2 or 3 or even 4 events. Which are about making localization more strategic and shifting left, right? And I think that the AI tooling can help us do that, but not by just replacing the translators. That's for me, that's not my work. That's not the time.
Right.
I don't spend any time translating. That's why I have my linguists that I work with. So what I want to do and what I need from AI to be able to start shifting left is to fix all this manual junk that I spend time with project managing.
True.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a valid point. So at the end of the day, the hope for AI is to take away all of the manual stuff and have localization be a strategic partner to other departments, whether you are under product, under content, but localization is all about international growth. At the end of the day, it's an enabler, not just a cost that company is paying, but it's something that really, what are the chances that a person would invest not knowing what they're investing in. So in the case of fintech and many other apps, there's just no chance that you can go somewhere without localization. And again, it's such an important tool in international growth that localization definitely can take up more of those market research responsibilities.
And I'm seeing too, particularly talking to technology providers out there who are talking to their respective clients. And one phenomenon that I've heard a couple times now is that organizations are seeing language as a safe place to start integrating AI into their organization. There's a lot of organizations out there that want to become an AI driven organization. You just heard Amazon's letting 30,000 people go to be replaced with AI, depending upon the headline you read, right? And I think that's kind of the goal of a lot of organizations is to streamline their processes with AI. And in order to do that, you have to have these hard conversations, but you also have to be realistic about it as well. So we're getting into that realistic phase. We're starting to see more and more processes as well as content and language being managed by AI. But there are some definite providers out there that are leading the cutting or driving forward the cutting edge on that, I would say, which I think the point that I'm ultimately trying to make is for software companies that are, for the Emmas of the world, localization directors at software companies, this isn't something that you need to have all the answers to. You don't need to go build all of this yourself. You've got a supply chain. There's consultants available to you. There's no engineering support, but there might be some outsourced engineering support. So, Emma, how have you dealt with getting more support to making sure that your localization program is innovative, is leveraging the best technologies? Is that a supply chain challenge? Is it an internal expectations challenge? Well,
Yeah,
what has your
I
experience
think,
been?
yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that when, there's obviously, like, it's a software company, there's loads of engineers. There's no lack of engineering power at the company, but you have to align your needs with the rest of the business, right? So if and of course mine do. All I do is serve other stakeholders, right? That's what localization is. We're the partner to especially at the FAVA, we're the partner to every single team that works there. So what's important, I think, at least to get more resources and to get to get engineering time dedicated to the problems that I'm trying to solve, is to show how they align with the problems that the other teams have. And I think that I haven't had a lot of success saying, oh, like, I need an engineer, now we've hired an engineer. But I have had success saying, okay, this is the localization problem that we have, and it's causing your metric here to suffer. So can you put something on your in your little backlog that's related to that? And I think that that's the best way. And I feel like at some point, and I don't know this to be true from my experience, but I feel like at some point, if you're getting these initiatives to a point where, yeah, we've solved 5-6 things just localization adjacent, then you can start to make the business case of maybe we have our own engineering resources, because there's so many. Look at all these problems we've solved already, and look at the impact they had on the business. Well, what if we had our own team? Then we didn't have to take away time from these other teams. I could see that being possible.
Yes. Yeah, just another little piece of ammunition, another bullet point for
Yeah.
your business case, right? To
In
put
the
in
end,
there.
I don't have really any sort of KPIs of my own. My KPIs
Well,
are the KPIs of the product
because
team.
we brought it back to the data conversation that we touched upon
Hmm.
earlier, right? And this
Yeah.
is anyone who's ever heard me talk. I'm up on my soapbox saying no one cares about your LQA scores, right? We need to, as an industry,
That was
start
great.
talking about things that matter,
Yeah.
right?
That was something I loved in the report, because I think it's like, and we always talk about, like, oh yeah, time to delivery and cost per word. I don't measure those things because no one cares about them. If it costs, like, 10 euros a word, but it makes us 20 euros a word,
Right.
nobody cares. So for me, it's all about what are the metrics that we're trying to drive at the company. And I try to look also, to the extent that I can, because I work with 15, 20 teams, but what metrics individually are they looking at?
Yep.
And then how do those metrics break down by language? And that's where then I know to maybe do some user testing. First I say, is the localization quality, is the translation quality good enough there? Well, if it is, then we're moving on to, we have to investigate something else.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That brings me to a great phrase that I heard recently. Not to cite the ownership over to me, but it's in the gist of it is talking to the C-suite about outcomes, not about output.
Yeah,
That's what
they're
they
not
care
that
about.
interested.
Right. Well, and this is something I would love to, and Nimsy as a company, and myself too, different workshops and stuff, put out a lot of information about here's what research says client-side stakeholders care about, right? Here's what you should be tracking in your localization program. But the reality is, there's no way to write one report and say, here, Emma, this is what you should be tracking for your localization program, because the reality is every company is different. Every company cares about different things. If you're a localization director, though, and you don't know what data and metrics are being discussed at the board meetings in the C-suite, then you need to find that out, and you need to figure out a way to make it relevant to localization.
Yeah, there's nothing like more satisfying than just to find the dashboard that they are using and then figure out how to put that language filter on there, because you don't have to be a data wizard. You just have to know how to do one thing per dashboard, and then you can start to do the work of investigating, figuring out what's going on, why are there discrepancies, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think it's a good use of my time to come up with my own unique metrics, because that's not at the end of the day what they're measuring. So if it's important to them that XYZ is increasing and I'm measuring ABC,
Right.
then I'm not going to be helping them.
And there's some things that are just kind of like a prerequisite. Like you don't get a cookie for meeting this KPI. It's like you meet this KPI because that's your freaking job to meet the KPI.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
that's how I feel about cost per word. I'm not trying to increase cost per word, but
Right.
I'm not like gonna spend my time trying to say how can I get the lowest option.
Yeah, because it would be short-sighted. It's not taking into
Yeah.
account all of the other things that are necessary there. But one of these things is time. Software in particular, we're talking about real-time updates being pushed. Gone are the days when we would push languages 2 weeks after we push the English or the source language update. Everything's expected to be in real time, same day localization. And we go into, turn this over maybe to Beata or Arina. We talk about the same day localization in the report. How crucial is this? Is this optional anymore? Is this one of those things that's just not even an option? We need to figure out a way to get it out there.
Well, it really depends on the company and on the content, I would say. So obviously some of the content needs to be localized right away, but the same day is not the right goal, I think. It's more about how we can make the localization seem, native and seamless for the user. So of course we can achieve some degree of same day localization with some content. For example, like we previously mentioned that we tier content, right? So this content that we can translate through machine translation or generative AI help, that can be achieved in the same day. But it's more about eliminating bottlenecks and actually understanding what is the process that we want to optimize. So of course AI can help with this, but it also helps to understand and to link it back to what we were talking about, to help C-suites and other teams understand that localization is at the core, actually, and that it's supposed to help everyone and not just be a cost thing. So I would say that while same-day localization is possible, it's not always the best solution. And it's more about actually, strategically measuring which markets, which content should be addressed first. And then when we decide on that, then we can go into, more detail. For example, what we are going to localize first, with what type of tools, with what type of resources. And once we actually have that image, then we can be more strategic, and then we can achieve the goal of the company. Sometimes for some companies, obviously, that would be to localize as fast as possible. And then the good enough standard is coming in handy. And especially if we have a lot of, if some companies have, of course, their own trained models, their own AI, then perhaps that could be, speeding up the process. We can also eliminate some content that doesn't need, for example, human review. That also speeds up the localization processes. And I think that the most important one is actually involving localization, in the software creation right away. So if we think with localization in mind, if we have that mindset that we are going to grow into other markets, that we are going to need this UI to be accessible for other people, then we can also eliminate some problems. Like, for example, with right to left languages, a lot of systems are just displaying the content wrong because nobody thought about that. And that's just one more, that's just one thing. But then there are the character languages, the Asian languages that work differently than the Indo-European ones. So those are all small things that need to be figured out in the beginning. And that's why I also think that localization is at the, at the core of the strategy of the company.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot have same-day localization if your product is not internationalized, right? Which is the
Which
core,
is a
which is
topic I didn't even bring up. I know internationalization is a whole thing, and I kind of
Yes.
purposefully scrolled past that, but you do cover it in the report.
Yes, yes, we do give, moreover, some helpful tips. Let's say, because the content has to be designed with internationalization in mind, right? Because let's say, as a Russian, I would know that whatever you write in English is going to be at least 40% longer in Russian or Ukrainian at that, or any Slavic language, which is also the case for, it's the content needs to be designed with Chinese language in mind and the Japanese. So definitely give the content a scroll, because we do give some handy formulas to calculate the length of the content that it needs to be in its original language.
Yeah, and we also give some, cultural tips, let's say. So the meaning of colors, which is something that not many people actually know about. But those are all, different things that matter actually when it comes to the user perception of the brand. So yeah, we give a lot of content for free. So it's really worth checking out.
I was trying to get there in time while you were still talking, but yeah, the culture ring here.
I was going to say one thing about the same day localization. So like on my end, with my team of linguists, freelancers, we have a sprint system. So our system for localizing is extremely consistent. The only time that we slow things down is when something comes to us and it's not localizable because of something in the design or something in the content that was written in a way that's too, Dutch centered. And so in that sense, the best way to speed up localization is to include localization higher up in the development process. Most software is not developed in a day either. I mean, maybe with AI that's going to be possible soon, but the developers also take some time. So usually when the developers are working, I'm also working, and our sprints are down to 2 days, and we can we could make that tighter, but we like to just make it consistent. So if we needed to do 1 day, we could do also 1 day, but we don't usually need 1 day because there's other processes that are happening. And so I think for me is like speed is valuable, but not just for fun. The point of
for
being,
bragging rights.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
If there's, I really, that's another thing that drives me
I call
a little
those
insane.
ego KPIs, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
vanity metrics.
Vanity KPI,
Right.
KPIs. Yeah. I don't. What I find like on my end frustrating is when people ask me, please can you get this localized? Like, please can you translate this ASAP? And then I like, okay, let me work on a sort of abbreviated cycle with my linguist. It's fine, we'll do it. And then they're like, okay, but now actually we had a review and we need to redo it. Like, but you needed it so quickly,
Oh yeah.
but you hadn't actually finished the whole process. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity to make sure that the process is working well and includes localization at the right moments, amongst other people, other stakeholders, right? Includes all the right stakeholders at the right moments before you start saying, okay, once you get that process working good, then you can think, can we make this process shorter? But if you don't have the process working consistently, then you're always going to end up with these bottlenecks at the end where you have to reloop or do some rework. And so it's like, let's not talk about 1 day localization until we can get any localization or any process consistently some period of time. Then we can iterate on how can we make it shorter to move things up.
Well, ultimately, like what I've heard using different words from everybody here is a consultant's 2 favorite words. It depends, right?
Yeah.
So when I talk about like how important is same day localization, it depends. Different organizations, different products, and different teams within the same organization are going to have different requirements on that. And I feel like today's, I'm watching the clock here, I'm going to wrap us up here pretty soon, but today this conversation was just kind of like a sprinkling of, it's a teaser for the full report, which of course, nimsy.com, if I haven't said it already 9 times, go grab the full report. It is chunky, it is huge. So give yourself some time, pour yourself some tea, and go check that out at nimsy.com. So that would be the next level. The third level after that is read the report and talk to an expert. It can be a NIMSY expert. It can be, there's a lot of consultants in this space. Your vendors have solutions architects that maybe you can talk to, but really those one-on-one problem solving sessions are where it's really at. So to wrap us up here, I just like to go down the line. All of the stuff that we talked about today, all of the stuff that we didn't get a chance to talk about today. What are some key takeaways you'd like your colleagues out there in the industry to understand about this? And Emma, let's start with you. Key piece of advice, tip for the next survival for the next 3 years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think this is a good question. There were so many topics and there's so many key takeaways, but I think, yeah, I think you have to start with a bigger picture of what you want to do, right? I think so for so long in localization, we've started from the small translation, the smallest possible element of what we do. And then we get, trapped in that bit. So I think to start looking at your whole localization program and how localization affects everything that you're doing at your software company or other, is going to be the starting point to then decide, okay, now what do I need to focus on? And then you can kind of bring it in. I also think I talked with someone about this before, is that localization at every company is different. So I've worked at, I think, 3 or 4 or 5 local companies doing localization now, and it means something different to every company. So you have to look at what your company is doing and what your company's specific challenges are to find out what localization can help with, and how that, the software localization is going to be able to push the needle for whatever they're looking for.
Awesome. So how do I summarize that really quickly?
Take that big picture. Look at the big picture, but look at your big picture.
I was just trying to figure out a word that's not like a
Holistic's nicer.
buzzword like holistic, because I hate myself every time I use buzzwords. But
Yeah.
take a holistic approach, expand your
Yes.
horizons, make sure that you're not
Yeah.
just thinking about the nitty gritty localization.
Yeah.
Take a bigger picture. Great. Arina.
I'm not gonna go somewhere completely different, because I do agree with Emma that this is the core theme of the past couple of years, and I think it's gonna go into the future. So I would urge any localization leader to be proactive in taking down the silos. So the first step to kind of make sure that everyone's thinking about localization is outreach. So reach out to a department and suggest a project that you can do together with them that would make their life easier. Thus, they will recommend that you do the same with some other department, and that brings localization to the decision-making table at the end of the day. So I would say that the key takeaway is that to make localization a pillar and a real expansion tool, localization leaders need to be proactive and advocating for our field.
Very
Right.
good. And Beata, you're up last.
Yeah, and I have the hardest task, but I agree totally with Emma and with Arina. I would just, add just a small thing, perhaps, that as you mentioned, Takar, there's a lot of knowledge out there, and it's no longer like that we have to stick to our company and just, focus on ourselves only, but we can actually use a lot of external resources to upgrade ourselves and our system. So I would say that start looking out, start seeing other options, and then, iterate, and see what works for you, what doesn't. But always, have this growth mindset and consider that there are other options, and always try to think, how you can actually put localization in the center, like Emma, Arina, and Zakir just said. Perhaps it may be some small things like, starting with the internationalization of the software, but then there are also other things. And if you start talking to the C-suite, if you actually start, making your points and showing that you are needed, that you're crucial for the company success, then that's where you go. So that's from me.
I love it. Yeah, and Emma mentioned being a conference junkie. Anytime there's an event happening, that's a great resource. Talk to other people in the industry. Read NIMSY's research. Read NIMSY's competitors' research. your hands on everything that you can get your hands on in this industry. Never stop learning. I think there's so many opportunities out there. Ladies, I'm going to wrap us up here. Thank you so much for each of you. Emma, waking up early. Arina and Beata, staying up late. Some of us have our real jobs to get to. I'm a minute late for my next meeting. So I'm going to take us out here. Ladies, gentlemen, chat, we are out of time for today. If you enjoyed this experience of the NIMSY Live event series, then join us next time by going to the NIMSY Insights LinkedIn page, clicking events, and signing up for the next event. I appreciate our guests today, Emma, Arina, and Beata. I appreciate my colleagues here at NIMSY Insights doing all the hard work so that I can have these fun conversations. And I appreciate you, the audience, joining us live today or watching the recording. I look forward to next time. Cheers.